Okay, so in this video I'm going to show you how I use whip stitch to join my hexagon threads together. You can use any thread that you want to. I think it's about finding what works for you. I tend to use a Gutermann sew-all thread because I pull quite tightly and I find that it kind of withstands how strong that I put it. And the really great thing about hexagon threads is that they sew up so much quicker than when you do kind of a 6 shape block. So I've got my basted shapes ready. I've got a pair of scissors, I've got a needle and thread already sorted, and I've also got my wonder clips which I use for joining them. At the end of my thread, if I can get that in focus, I've done 3 or 4 knots just on top of one on top of the other, and that's just to sort of hold it all in place as I'm joining. Again, it's up to you and kind of what works best for you. So you're going to start by joining 2 together. So I know it's going to be these 2 here, and they're going to put them to their right sides together. And I'm going to sew, I tend to sew left to right. If you sew right to left, then that's fine. So you can just turn it round. But the thing you want to do is you want to start on the outside of your block and work your way in. So yeah, just rotate it, whether you prefer to sew right to left or left to right. Make sure you're working from the outside into that centre of the block. And because I'm working towards the centre, and you can see I wanted these stems to radiate out, I've just made sure that they're lining up. You can sort of roughly see here from the back, and I'm just going to clip that into place because I know that that's definitely where I want that to be. At which point I'm now going to go in with my needle and thread. And I actually start about 1/4 of an inch in from the edge, and that's because I don't want my knot to be on the weakest point, which is going to be on this outside edge. So I start 1/4 of an inch in. You can see I'm going through the 2 very edges of the pieces, so I'm not going through the paper template. I'm catching, say, like 2 fibres on each shape, and I'm just going to pull my thread through, and you can see because I've done 3 or 4 knots there, it just stops it coming through. But just to be doubly sure, I just do a kind of holding stitch there to hold it all into place. And then I'm going to go back to the start and work my way in exactly the same way. So this is called a whip stitch. So I've gone back to the outside edge, and I'm just going to do another holding stitch just so I can make sure that that is secure. And then I'm just going to work my way from left to right, going through the 2 very edges of the fibres on both pieces. And different people say different things about how many stitches you should do. I probably do around about 12 per inch, but you know, you can do more, you can do less. It's about finding what works best for you. So you just want to keep working that way over by going through the very edges of the shapes. Make sure you're not catching the paper template, and you're going to keep working all your way up to this clip. And once you get to this inside edge, it's completely up to you what you would rather do now. So because my pieces are quite small, I'm actually just going to go ahead and join the next piece. If your shapes are much bigger, then I would work all the way up to this edge, do a holding stitch like we did, and then take the thread back about 1/4 of an inch and tie a knot in it. So the way that I do a knot, I'll just show you as if I was doing it. So I've passed the needle through the fabric, and I've left a loop of thread. I then pass the needle through that loop twice. So once, twice, and pull it, and you should be able to feel there's like a little knot there that would hold it in place. But in the same way that we didn't put a knot on the outside edge, I wouldn't recommend putting the knot on the inside edge, just because this is where it's going to open out, so it'll be slightly weaker. So if you're finishing your thread here, work all the way up to the inside edge, then go back 1/4 of an inch and do your knot there. I'm going to show you, because my pieces are fairly small, they're 1.5 inches, I'm going to carry on. So I did my knot here at the start, I went back to the outside edge and then did a whip stitch all the way along. I'm taking my clip off now because I've reached that point. This, you can sort of open it up and just see it sits really nicely and the stitches aren't visible, and you can use a thread that will blend in, so it doesn't matter if the stitches are visible too, because it, you know, I think if you've spent this many hours stitching something, sometimes you want your stitches to show for the hours you've put in. So you can open it up, and what I'm going to do then is I'm going to pass my needle through. So because I was working all the way up and I've actually just done a holding stitch here, so in the same way we did a holding stitch, I would just pass the needle through, and you can either do 2 stitches to hold it into place, or in the same way that I said about finishing off, you could do a small knot here, and it doesn't matter because you haven't sort of cut your thread, so it doesn't make it a weak point. I'm then going to pass the needle through the back here. So what I'm doing is I'm not going through the paper template, I'm just going through the back of the fabric, and it's just because I want to travel my needle across in a way that's not going to be visible on the front, and that'll sort of see me good for that edge there. And I'm now going to do exactly the same, and I want this piece here, so I'm going to line it up, making sure that this centre point where I want the stems of my flowers to be is in place, and I'm going to clip that, and just make sure that you don't catch your thread if you're sewing. And because I only managed to pass my needle this far, I'm going to do the same thing that we did at the start on the last piece. So I'm going to do a holding stitch here, so I'm just passing it through the edges of the fibres, and that's just secured my thread there. And I'm now going to work in exactly the same way as we did before, so I'm working from the outside edge in. So if I'm working left to right, but if you want to work right to left, or if you work with your needle coming towards you doing the whip stitch, and that's fine, just rotate it and make it work for you. So I've now done my holding stitch, and I'm going to go back to the outside edge. So again, it's about 1/4 inch difference for me, and I'm just going to keep doing this whip stitch, work my way into the centre of the block, and then I can finish it by joining that last edge. And if you feel that the clip gets in your way as you kind of work closer to the centre, then you can just take it off, because there's enough to sort of hold it into place at that point. Okay, so once I get to this centre of the block, I'm just going to go right through. So I want to make sure that I'm catching this stem, because this is exactly where I wanted these points to line up. And I'm just going to go through twice at the same spot, because I want to make sure that that is spot on and lined up where I want to be. And again, if you want to make sure it's really secure, this loop, as you're putting the thread through, you can just pass your needle through it once, and that'll just sort of hold that really crisply in place. You can just double check that you're happy with where it is, and at that point I'm just going to bend it, and now I'm working my way out to the outside to finish that final edge. So I'll just add another clip there, and I'm just bending this paper piece here. So this one's already sewn into place, but because it's just paper, you can just bend it, and that's absolutely fine. It's not going to damage it. And I'm going to do the same holding stitch that I did to finish it off, and that's because I want to make sure this is all nicely secured to this edge now. So I've done 2 stitches in place. If I wanted to, I could pass the needle through that loop just to make sure it's really secure. And now I am sewing right to left just to keep working my way up and to close that final edge. Just doing the whip stitch and going through the very edges of the pieces, making sure that I don't catch the paper template. And that's what's nice about the hexagon thirds, is you don't have to worry about having 6 shapes that you've got to join in at the centre of your block. It's just the 3. And you can sort of feel with your needle, if you're about to go through the paper template, you'll sort of feel a bit more resistance than when you're just going through the fabrics. So you sort of, the more you do, the more you start to get a feel for kind of what works for you and the rhythm that works for you. So when I get to this outside edge, I'm going to do the same holding stitch that I do. You can tell that I like to do lots of holding stitches to make sure it's all safe. So I've done 1 stitch, I've done a second stitch just to make sure that's really secure, and then I'm going back 1/4 inch, and you can see I've literally just travelled that thread 1/4 inch, and that's fine. I'll do a second stitch in the same place, and then this time will be my knotting stitch. So I pass the needle through, I leave a little loop, and I put the needle underneath and through that loop once, twice, pull. You can feel the knots there, and then you can cut it. I tend to leave about 1/2 inch of thread there, and then that is your shape all sewn together. And you can see that there isn't any gap in the centre, and it's all thread basted, and you can give it a good press if you wanted it to lie flat after you've kind of after you've manipulated the paper. But yeah, that is all good to go, and that's how I whip stitch my pieces together.